govori Slobodan Milošević, predsjednik predsjedništva Centralnog komiteta Saveza komunista Srbije.
Drugarice i drugovi, mnogi ovdje danas pamte kako u tim danima ništa nije bilo teško i kako se ljudima činilo da je sve lako i moguće.
The war. When I was a teenager, the war broke out in X-Yugoslavia. And it was a really, really politically and sociologically complicated thing that happened. And wars are never easy for anyone. And at the time we had this president who was a very complicated entity, a charismatic, autocratic leader. We ended up with a lot of those essentially dictators. And his name was Slobodan Milošević. And he ruled with an iron fist, if you will. And the people that I knew, the people in my community, the people in my neighborhood, were not aligned with his rhetoric at all. But they were also, in many ways, disempowered by it, especially in the eyes of the world. And so no one really got to see us, and everyone got to see him. And that's a really complicated and difficult thing to experience, especially while your entire world is crumbling around you. Yugoslavia was created based on this idea that we could get over our collective trauma, that we could get over what Nazis did to Serbs and Romani people and Jews and queer people during the Second World War, and that we could repair that without really talking about it, without really openly addressing the wounds. And that never works. And so when the collapse began, all of those ideas about brotherhood and sisterhood and comradeship that were really the ideals that my grandfather, who fought the Nazis during the Second World War, and my other grandfather, who was imprisoned in a concentration camp during the Second World War, and my grandmothers, who fought in the war, they all believed in that wholeheartedly. And then suddenly all of this is crumbling around them. And so their ideals, their lives, their belief system were falling apart. And of course, Yugoslavia was not perfect. There were so many complicated, dark issues there. But it was also an ideal for a lot of people. And once that ideal was crushed, it was a crude awakening for a lot of us. But what was happening during the rule of Slobodan Milošević was that in some strange way, I would say even magical, as a writer of magical realism, we started to come back to our long forgotten roots. And one of the things that I learned as a folklorist and someone who studies ritual and old ceremonial songs and dances, one thing that we used to do way back when, before the Byzantines came and converted us into Orthodox Christianity, we used to sing and drum and make noise and ring bells and hit sticks together. And through this magical noise, we would expel the bad spirits from our homes. And so people would dress up as spirits. They would wear long gowns, and they would wear animal skins, and they would wear masks, and they would wear horns. During the days of Milošević, he had one of his main ways of communicating his power was through the 8 o'clock news. And we all knew the musical theme. It would come up, we would all shudder, and then this slew of lies and misinformation would come on. And people spontaneously started doing what their ancestors used to do. They went into their kitchens, they opened their drawers, and they didn't find drums in there. They didn't find bells in there because they were civilized. What they found were pots and pans and wooden spatulas. And so they took these pots and pans and wooden spatulas, and we all collectively started to make noise during this news hour to drown out the stuff that was untrue, the stuff that was unkind, the stuff that wasn't ours, that was someone else's, that wasn't our truth. And these collective moments of noise making became incredibly powerful. And I remember as a kid, I was ecstatic. It truly was. We would stand on our balconies and we would look at our neighbors from across the street, and together we would make noise the way that our ancestors did. And what we were really trying to do, I think, was expel these bad spirits, expel these negative energies, expel the stifling energy that was suffocating us. They were suffocating our authentic voices. That was messing with our lives. That was destroying everything that was sacred to us. NATO bombing of X-Yugoslavia started in 1999, and it was in direct response to a lot of things, but one of them was Milosevic's toxic rhetoric and also the things that he was actually doing. And the war was surreal to so many of us. This country that was, again, it was based on this perhaps misguided and Pollyannish idea of brotherhood and sisterhood and comradeship. It was just disappearing in front of our very eyes. We never thought there would be another war fought on our land. We swore we would remember, and there would be never another war. And yet, 1990s, and the war begins again. It's only been less than 50 years, 40-something years. So that was really hard on everyone that I knew. And it felt impossible to survive, to even breathe in that environment for a young person. And so, when the bombs started to fall, and her grandchildren began to dream about dark staircases and raw-boned black dogs howling into the night, and lost needles and broken brandy glasses, Baba Lena made the sign of the cross over each of their glistening brown foreheads as they slept, and she began to eat their fear. She would pluck the wisps of fear out of the air around the children's heads like smoky feathers. Her thumb and forefingers turned into pincers again, like a slender beak, her soft mouth open to swallow what was never meant to be ingested by any living thing, however small. And the children would wake up into the new morning of their first war, unperturbed by the sounds of bomber planes and air raid sirens and the explosions that made the walls of their overcrowded little house, equally fortified by cardboard, straw, and mud, shiver like a wet kitten and spew dust onto the kitchen table covered with a yellow oilcloth with flowers dancing upside down. That is how Baba Lena made the fear disappear. Young men of my age were being drafted into the war, and this wasn't their war. It really had very little to do with them. They didn't want it. They didn't want to kill other people. They didn't want to die. And so I think this is when the mass immigration movement really began. And whoever had the ability to get away, they did. And this, of course, continued during the war and after the war. There were so many refugees. People were fleeing the war in droves. And a lot of folks went to the United States, to Australia, to Canada, to New Zealand. And for whatever reason, I always imagined that I would end up on Turtle Island, North America, even since I was a little kid. I remember watching the old reruns of Grizzly Adams on my parents' ancient TV set in our brown living room and just dying to be in that wilderness. That sense of freedom, that sense of the wild, a man who has a bear for a pet that follows him everywhere, and it's not even imaginary. That was the best thing ever. And I would imagine what America would smell like. I would imagine what the soil would feel like between my fingers. I would imagine what water would taste like if I drank it from a mountain spring. And it felt like a dream. And also, to me, at the time, America spelled freedom.